Welcome to Character Assassination, a podcast about art, tea, and a jolly spot of murder. Each episode, a new creator of characters is inducted into the Society for Ungentlemanly Conduct, during which they'll subject a new character to abject misery while chatting about all manner of nonsense. It's civilized, and there's homicide. What more could you ask for? I'm your Chap-at-large, Nerius, and on this episode, I'm joined by illustrator and comics creator Dan Berry. So put the kettle on, take a seat, and ignore the thing scratching at your window. It's probably nothing. Maybe. Anyway, this is Character Assassination. Castle Squidink has some pretty odd smells at the best of times. We grow sentient cheese that refuses to shower. But over the last few days, every time I flush the loo, there's a distinct stench of Cthulhu and chocolate orange. Is that something you can call a plumber for? Anyway, we have some company again, which usually I'd discourage. But we appear to have been visited by the dastardly Mr. Dan Berry. How are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm fine. The rash has come back, but, green's the normal colour for a rash.
I noticed you called me dastardly, and I appreciate that. Thank you for noticing.
I was going with blackguard originally, but I think dastard is softer.
That'll work.
So, we're about to induct you into the Society for Ungentlemanly Conduct, because let's face it, there's nothing more ungentlemanly than forcing a poor defenceless character to live in this cruel world. But before we start, perhaps you could tell us exactly what the devil it is you do.
Predominantly, I try and make stories appear inside someone else's head. I try and think of it as a kind of mind control. So I can do a few little marks on a piece of paper over here, and then I can make someone looking at a screen the other side of the world go, "Oh, that was make a noise," or do a thing, or have tears come out of their eyes, or some sort of thing. So that's the sort of primary ambition for me, is to do this mind control thing where I will make a drawing that then affects someone in some way, or a string of drawings that has multiple effects along the way as well.
If you were going to create the character of Dan Berry when you're drawing, what kind of character is Dan?
Oh, he's because I do rather a lot of sort of autobiographical comics about myself, and it's a fabrication. Essentially, when you said I was dastardly, I think that's fairly accurate, because it's an exaggeration. It's you're sort of in a monologue as you sort of walking around a town, or thinking about making a cup of tea, or whatever it is, cooking. It's that inner monologue that you think, I'm never letting that out of my mouth. That's the most ridiculous thing. And I think it's that particular aspect of Dan Berry that ends up on the page.
So basically you're trying to fool us into believing you're a much nicer version of you.
Oh, much nicer, yeah. The drawings of me are much nicer than the actual person, I'm sure.
So are we saying the character of Dan is just a mask?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Now, let's talk about the nasty business of dragging a character kicking and screaming into the world. How do you usually approach it?
Usually I have a little think beforehand. So depending on what kind of character I'm going to be designing, is it a human character that's based on someone that I know? What I like to be able to do is to have something to test it against. So one of the characters I'm drawing for a book at the moment, he's got quite long hair, and he always sort of tucks it behind his ears. And so I'm always thinking about this guy I used to know who had quite big, bushy, long hair, and he'd always be sort of tucking his hair behind his ears, and as a result, his ears always looked like they stuck out like a huge distance. And I've always thought about that, and it was one of those sort of quirks of character that I felt was believable, and it also gave me sort of little handles on the side of the head to show the orientation of it as well. Because I have a relatively sort of loose, cartoony style, I don't draw realistically, but I need to still obey the laws of sort of physics, I guess. And so, if a character's looking up, I need to be able to position the ears so that obviously the eyes, the features are further up on the globe of the head, and the ears are further down, and you can see the orientation of the chin and things like that. So little quirks that give you a sense of believability for the character. What I'll often do is have a really good think first before I start drawing anything, which is incredibly boring to watch, But what I'll do is I'll sort of fix in my mind's eye the idea of the character, and then sort of describe it to myself. And if there's, these common bits of reality I can grasp onto, like the ears, like a pinstripe suit, like a pair of boots that I saw that I thought, oh, they're really nice boots. I'll take those and feed it into it, and then and what comes out is something that is inferior to the picture inside my head. But no one else on the planet knows what that picture looks like, so I just pretend that's exactly what I wanted to do the whole time.
And yet every other artist on the planet can relate to that. This isn't what it looks like in my head, but this is what's come out.
And then, the trick, obviously we're behind the curtain at this point, is to tell all the, the civilians out there, no, I just do it.
Yeah, it's easy.
It's easy. You just draw it.
This stuff just happens.
Yeah, I just, I fart these out. 12 at a time. It's brilliant.
You have a particularly fluid, almost gestural style to your illustration work. Do you find that causes problems when duplicating the same character?
Sometimes, yeah. But when I was talking earlier about the those sort of like handles, each character that I draw will have like a specific set of handles. So in the last book I did, 3 Rooms from Valerie's Head, Valerie had a very particular hairstyle and she had a very particular way of holding her shoulders. And, the multitude of other characters in there each had their own individual quirks and, lack of a jaw or, glasses or something that made it easy to orient them, I think. As long as you've got that believability of the character sort of nailed in each drawing, they sort of flow together quite seamlessly. But I think that if you were to sort of onion skin them into an animation, you'd have a real tough time animating them.
So let's talk about this character that you're going to design. While we can give you time to think about it a bit. That could make for quite a quiet podcast. Who are you going to be forcing into a life of horrors?
Well, I wanted to give you a few options, to be honest. I've got a few characters that I've been fooling around with for a few months. So I have, there's some animal characters and there's a couple of human characters. So do you want to go human or do you want to go animal?
Bear in mind you're going to have to kill this character at the end.
Makes zero difference to me.
Excellent. That callous attitude towards your character is exactly what we're looking for. Actually, let's see if you can decide which is the strangest of those characters.
The strangest is nearly definitely an eel that I've been drawing. I remember taking my kids to some sort of aquarium, sea life centre, and seeing this moray eel sort of groaning out of a pipe in a tank somewhere. I remember thinking, I love the shape of his head and that nasty little ghastly, beady-eyed little look that he's got. And so I've been sort of just fooling around with him in my sketchbook. And when you say the weirdest one, I've been drawing him as a gangster with arms and legs. So as such, eels are notoriously limbless. Don't know if you know.
Right, notoriously, yes.
Notoriously limbless. And so a character with arms and legs that doesn't normally have arms and legs, he barely functions as an eel anymore, but I rather like drawing him.
Marvellous. In which case, I shall be creating alongside you a nemesis for your eel. His name will be Algernon.
So I want to call my my eel here. I live in Shropshire in the UK, and it has some really wonderfully exotic village names. So this guy, I think, is going to be a small village on the way to work called Preston Gubbals.
Because if there's one thing weird British villages are good for, it's ridiculous names.
Isn't it wonderful?
It's fantastic, Preston Gubbals. I sort of want to live in Preston Gubbals now.
I haven't been to Preston Gubbals. I can heartily recommend it, gotta say.
Now then, Algernon is going to be a cockney maker of pies, because what better to stuff into a crust than an eel of gigantic proportions?
Yeah, they're delicious, nutritious, party in your mouth. Wonderful.
Yes, as any Londoner will tell you, there's nothing.
Oh, God, they won't shut up about it.
Every time I go to London, it's all about eels.
I hope they're listening. London.
London are listening. Let's talk about in the fictional world in which Preston Gubbals exists. Tell me a little bit about Preston's birth. How did he come into this world?
Egg.
Egg.
I think. I think it got washed ashore, and I think it's probably a similar sort of timeline location to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Probably some sort of toxic rat that bit the egg or something like that.
This rat with martial arts training spread his training by some kind of bite osmosis. Do we feel? Is that
I guess. Yeah. I mean, it seems legit.
I feel like I'm forcing you into a canon.
Let's say yes. Let's say yes.
Let's
Exactly.
say yes. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We might get sued, but we'll risk it.
I'm sure they'll have to find us first.
What are you saying?
We're
not popular enough for...
Oh right, no, I was just meaning that we're incredibly good at
hiding. Yes, we are incredibly good at hiding. Now, one of the things we like to start with, I say we in the royal sense of the word, obviously, is deciding whether Preston Gubbals is... I can't say the name without laughing. Preston Gubbals is going to have a life which is...
Mr. Gubbals.
Mr. Gubbals, the incorrigible Mr. Gubbals, is going to have a life beginning easily, or would he be born under a bad sign? Do you have a preference?
I think that he's one of these characters that is sort of... danced his way through life without a care in the world, and as such has little regard for the feelings and well-being of others.
Then he deserves everything he gets.
I think he does, yeah. I mean, he's got bags under his eyes, which is the surefire sign of a villain.
A cad, no less.
Exactly.
Fantastic. But we're going to throw a spanner into the works. And at the Society for Ungentlemanly Conduct, our spanner's name is Suitcase, because he lives in a suitcase. Nobody knows what it is, and frankly, it's probably best that we don't ask, given that it has been known to devour puppies on an industrial scale. But it has one useful trait. It generates random numbers for us, which we'll use to establish precisely how much misery Preston Gubbals will be subjected to. Suitcase, if you wouldn't mind. Suitcase has given us a 6 out of a possible 10, which means that Preston Gubbals will be living a relatively unlucky life.
Okay, I mean, he's had it quite good so far. I mean, he's had a good innings. So I feel like, yeah, okay. You know, I think you can take the rough with the smooth, can't you?
I like that you're accepting that he perhaps, it's time for him to experience some misery.
Yes, okay. How do you want to hurt this lovely eel?
We're going to obviously use Algernon. And Algernon, as a pie maker, has certain tools. So, unfortunately, Algernon has sauntered into Preston Gubbals' life, and he's caught Preston unawares, as the eel has had a pretty easy life, so he's not going to be expecting anything bad to occur. He manages to wrap approximately 60% of Preston Gubbals in a delicious pie crust. He hasn't completely covered him. He didn't roll a 10. So
okay. I'm very pleased about that.
A little bit of pastry, just enough to make him slightly disabled.
Okay, right, so shall I draw him with some serious
pie
damage?
Absolutely. Pastrify that motherfucker.
Okay, let's... Right, okay, so 60%. I feel, okay, that he's going to be, as a result, kind of unhappy about this.
You would imagine.
I think his eyes are looking skyward to the Lord above, thinking, Jesus, why? Why have you done this to me? Alright, okay, I'm kind of enjoying what I'm doing here now.
Why have you done this to me?
Why have you done this to me? Yeah, there we go. I'm going to do like a big pie that you might capture 4 and 20 blackbirds within. There we go.
That's a good 60%.
I did try and think about the perspective while I was drawing this. Like, is this going to please Algernon? Is he going to feel that there's a good 60% of that character inside that pie?
Excellent. Well, we've discussed Ely Preston Gubbals' start in life. Let's talk a bit about yours. How did you start in this dastardly business?
I remember drawing like a lot when I was a kid. I remember we used to get the Beano and the Dandy my parents delivered it into our hands. And I remember, because my name's Dan, I had the Dandy, and my brother Tim had the Beano, of course. And my mum had worked in Belgium as a youngster, and brought back a bunch of like French kids books and French comics and things like that. And so we got inducted into the ways of Asterix and Tintin and folk like that. And I remember, trying to copy out all of the sort of Asterix. I remember thinking Asterix had really weird feet because they didn't have normal foot shapes in the thing. And so I was always drawing when I was a kid. And when I was at school, I was the one who could draw, and so I'd sit in a maths class, and instead of doing the test as I was supposed to, I would draw the teacher, or I'd draw the other people in the class, and sort of try and make the girls laugh, basically. That was
smoothie.
I know. Whew, nothing's changed, does it? And I guess I'd always been interested in drawing. When I was a teenager, I was in bands, and so I would do the sort of CD tape covers, things like that, CDs and tapes, that traditional media that used to exist. And just kind of that was it, really. I really enjoyed drawing, and really liked comics. I fell out of it for a while, obviously. I think everyone kind of does when they're a teenager and they're cool and they already know everything. And so I did end up coming back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s with books by people like Dan Clowes and Chris Ware. I remember being a little bit sort of astonished by what they were doing, because I remember all that I could remember about comics was that they had people being punched through walls, and then all of a sudden you've got these comics that don't do that, and they were different and exciting. And because I'm talking, I keep on drawing on the wrong layer on Procreate here. There we go. Just going to get a delicious golden crust on this pastry here. So then I wanted to be a filmmaker as a teenager. So I wanted to go to college and study film, and make zombie movies and things like that. And then remember getting frustrated that you needed other people to do that. And I could probably draw it, and then use that to tell people what I want to do. And then that sort of turned into comics. And I didn't really know what I was doing, if I'm completely honest with you. So I would make these little mini comics, and I would put them inside the books I liked in Waterstones, the bookshop in town, because I thought if I do that, then the publisher will come in and see what I've done, and they'll be like, "Hey kid, you're pretty good." Didn't work that way. I remember friends of mine going, "Did you put any comics inside books in a bookshop?" I was like, "Yeah, I did. Yeah. Why?" I said, "Well, why not? Why shouldn't I? I think that's quite cool." And they're like, "Yeah, but you told me to go and buy that book, and then you've already given me this book." And I was like, "Oh crap, I did, yeah." So it wasn't exactly, wouldn't say I was a bright youngster.
I'm just impressed that you have your own version of the child hanging around Hollywood in the hopes that a producer will spot them and say, "Kid, I'm going to make you a star."
Yeah, that's it. It's exactly what I did. It was pretty stupid, to be honest with you. But charming nonetheless. So then it was a case of meeting some friends who did comics, who then got me into doing other things with comics, and then going off to comic shows, and then realizing, oh, I see, this is how you do it, and then eventually finding publisher, or doing podcasts, teaching comics as well. I've spent the last 11 years teaching comics at a university level, which has been a delight.
I know personally, and I'm sure most visual artists are the same, I started drawing by doing nothing but ripping off better artists. And that was how I learned. So, to put this perhaps indelicately...
Who am I ripping off?
Rip on? No, who did you initially rip off when you said, "I don't want to know who you're ripping off now, Dan"? Nobody needs to know that.
Well, I think initially, like when I started to try and take comics seriously, because I was the person that could draw, in school. So I was, I can draw, relatively realistically when the spirit so moves me. And so I remember getting a load of Jack Kirby and those sort of classic comics and trying to figure out how to ink with a brush, because I don't know about your development. Mine was drawing with a pencil, and then drawing with felt tips or a Sharpie or something equally horrendous like that. Apologies if you're drawing with a Sharpie right now.
I'm just going to throw out the Sharpie.
Did I just break your heart? Sorry. So, I remember thinking, how did these guys do comics? Oh, they worked, with a, Sable, series, Winsor & Newton Series 7 or whatever it was with, and so I thought, that's the magic pen. So then I would, I had books and books of sort of inking practice where I was trying to ink Jack Kirby or, whoever. And then seeing the control that Chris Ware had over a brush and making it look like a vector line, and thinking, oh wow, that's some control. And so I spent a lot of time working with a brush and brush pen to try and get that level of control. And I think that I'm glad I did it because it was informative, because it's very, very difficult to do. And you can give yourself real sort of elbow pain and RSI and all the rest of it doing that. But it really got me into the idea of tools and how we work with tools and what they're for, and how you can use them for different effects. So then I became really interested in the idea of pastiche and how other people did what they did. I think that when you try out someone else's style or someone else's tools, you kind of put on their personality for a short time, and you sort of inhabit their skin, sort of flopping around ineffectively, mimicking them. Obviously everyone can tell it's an imitation. A lot of that was taking place in my sketchbooks, which for me it's just a practice. You just muck around and sort of tootle around with it. It's not really for any purpose other than running laps, basically. In terms of my own work, I remember seeing the work of Gippi, the Italian artist, and because I'd had a head full of everyone else's styles and how it worked and tools, I remember seeing his work at the Angoulême Festival and having this sort of hallelujah moment where I realised that what he was doing was kind of similar to what I was trying to find out how to do, in that it's using the line to describe the form and the colour to describe the volume, which he did with line and wash, master's level, absolutely incredible stuff. But that was the sort of light that went on in my head, oh, I understand now. What I'm doing is describing the form with the line and the volume with the colour. So if I've got a page of comics here that is, as yet, it looks a bit nude. It's uncoloured, so it's, for me, I look at the sort of line work and I'm like, ugh, gross, no one will ever love it. Until I put the colour on and I'm like, actually, it's actually all right.
It's interesting you say that, because I find the same with detail and cross hatching. When I'm doing outlines, I think my work looks ugly as hell, and it's only when I add cross hatching or when I add detail lines, the little kind of divots and things, then it starts to take shape.
Well, I had a similar thing, because some of the very earliest comics I drew, which it was lots and lots and lots of meticulous cross hatching, and I remember seeing it from across the room, and I thought, oh, it's an ink wash. And then, you sort of eyes clicked into focus, and I was like, oh no, it's hatching. And then, I realised that I was spending hours upon hours, doing lots of little lines that, if you do one slightly off, then the whole thing looks wrong. And I was like, oh, I could just put an ink wash down and get the same tone, and it would take, 20 seconds instead of 2 hours. My process has often been, what's the path of least resistance?
It's true. I don't know if you'll share this opinion. I've sort of come to the conclusion, after including a lot of cross-hatching in my own work, that cross-hatching sort of feels like it comes from a lack of confidence in your ability. Instead of being bold enough to use a solid swathe of black ink, it feels kind of safer to build it up gradually with cross-hatching.
I agree. Yeah. I think that... Oh, I remember thinking that, it must be good I've done so much drawing.
Mm.
And you can often see when someone has overhatched something to the point of like, oh, you've gone through the paper on that one.
Yeah.
You know.
You were talking a little bit about sort of that almost eureka moment when you realised that maybe someone else is doing something similar. What did that do for you moving forward?
I think it helped me gain confidence because I had this sort of heritage of sort of French Belgian art, as a youngster, with these like weird kids books that my mum brought back from the continent, and I never felt a sort of kinship with the kind of American comics, with the sort of slick lines and I liked everything a little bit messy and a little bit scrappy. Really love Quentin Blake's work because he can make something look utterly easy, painless. There we go. Tony Ross as well. We've got a grand history of sort of British children's illustrators. Going back hundreds of years. That is it's wonderful to be able to see that sort of loose, but very formally very loose. There's formal structure in that looseness. I absolutely love that. I think that there's a fine line between formal structure and looseness, and then just scrappiness and wishy-washy. Don't know what I'm doing. I've thrown a bucket of paint at the thing, and now I have a drawing. Like, not the same thing.
That looseness is confidence.
I think that's it. And seeing Jippy's work, I think, gave me the confidence to kind of understand that it didn't have to be perfect. It didn't have to be realistic. It didn't have to be beautifully rendered. It didn't. There was loads of things that it didn't have to be, but it had to be believable. So it gave me that kick up the bum to say, right, make sure that what you're doing next time is believable. So the environments that you're in. So like this comic I'm drawing at the moment. He's got a cactus on his desk. He's got a little wrestling calendar. He's got his headphones, and it's all these little details. Even the particular kind of chair that he's sitting on is something that I've seen and sat on myself. There's a scooter in the background of one of these panels, and it's my son's scooter. And so it's all things that exist in real life and are 100% plausible. So I'm not trying to make anything up. I'm just trying to feed more of the reality that I've understood into the reality I'm trying to create.
I'm glad you mentioned environment, because I'd really like to talk about the environment that Preston Gubbals calls his usual haunt. Where does Preston Gubbals hang out, generally?
I think in the bar of a like a not very nice hotel, like a sort of very cheap hotel for people at conferences.
Ah, yes. Yeah.
As a comic artist, I feel like I spend an awful lot of time in these hotels.
I don't want to say Travelodge your jury's in, but that sounds...
Oh, upper class. Oh, I see. Oh, la la. Someone's doing all right for themselves.
Availability isn't doing all right for themselves. Dear God, Dan, if you're not staying at Travelodge, where are you staying?
I refuse to answer this question. I have quite a big car.
So he hangs out at the kind of bars that you'd find in those not-to-be-named places.
The bar that adjoins a conference centre. So it's got a lot of tables and chairs that are supposedly quite trendy, or they might have been like 5 to 10 years ago. It has like split levels. So it'll have little steps to fall over once you've had a couple. It's trying to be like that sort of cabaret style bar, but in a corporate convention centre. Without. I'm
getting a very Milton Keynes vibe from Preston Gubbals at the moment.
Yeah, I mean he thinks it's quite classy, but he got bitten by a kung fu rat when he was an egg, so he doesn't really. I don't really think he's best placed to talk about classy.
What's his level of class? I mean, it's
Oh, his level of class is a coffee with one of those flavoured syrups in, a bag of minstrels in a bowl.
A bag of minstrels in a bowl. What did he do with the bag?
Put it straight in the recycling because he's seen the sewers. He understands.
I get it. So. Let's step into Preston's world a second and make things hard for him. Now, Algernon has spotted Preston Gubbals responsibly disposing of a minstrel's bag.
Do you know that is the very first time in the history of humanity that combination of words has been strung together in that way?
Yes. So, he's spotted Preston Gubbals disposing of his minstrel bag responsibly, and he sees his chance. He grabs the minstrel's bag and slips it over Preston Gubbals' head.
Is he still inside the pie?
He's still inside the pie. How he gets along, we'll need to
just sort of like
out.
Hopping, I guess, like you would if you're in a sleeping bag.
He's got to build up some serious muscles to move around with hopping in that manner, especially as an eel.
I guess he's got that core strength, doesn't he?
Ideally, how does Preston Gubbals defend himself against such an attack by a dastardly character such as Algernon?
Oof. See, I think as a reptile, I think he's a reptile, not a fish. I don't know. He's with his arms and legs, he looks more reptilian. So I think in order to try and escape, he does the thing that those lizards do, where the tail comes off. But I think his arms and legs just sort of pop off, and he sort of reverts to eel status, and sort of just thrashes about.
You're making me fall in love with Preston Gubbals every step we take, Dan. One person who doesn't love Preston Gubbals is Algernon. But to find out the extent of this, we'll have to ask Suitcase. Suitcase? I fed you last Thursday week. Besides, the neighbour's dog won't give birth until the next full moon. Can we get on with it? 4. So, yes, Preston Gubbals has managed to escape in his slithery manner.
Good.
But, unfortunately, he still has the minstrel's bag attached to him in some fashion on his head. So, that's a permanent disability as far as I'm concerned.
Like, is it all the way over? Is it suffocatingly bad? Is it?
It's perhaps he can tailor it to make it more livable on his head.
I think he's just sort of like poked it all the way through, and he's got it like a little ruff.
Oh, that's classy. See, Preston and his classy ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Excellent. So it's unfortunately something of a disability, but at least he's escaped.
He now no longer can move with stealth.
That's true.
Because it's going to sound like this every time he moves.
That just adds character, Dan.
Available for Foley work. Let's see. So I think the pie remains, but it's got like arms sort of hanging out of it. Obviously, he's lost his arms. It was terrible to do. He kind of chose it for himself, though, so I can't really have a great deal of pity for him because he wanted this.
Of course. And I like that you've described it as a to-do. Like, this disability is something of a pickle.
Well, we know where this is heading, don't we?
Dan, I never know where anything is heading. We're not complete savages here at the Society for Ungentlemanly Conduct, so we'll pause the misery momentarily for a tea break. What's your tea of choice, Dan?
Coffee.
Awkward. We may have to call a halt to this entire podcast. Tea's kind of integral to the universe.
I just don't particularly like it, to be honest. I just really like coffee. I think what I have is what you might call a caffeine addiction, and I don't care how I get that fix. Just need that sweet fix. I never, I always used to just drink instant coffee, and I've only very recently discovered the absolute joy of filter coffee in a little cafetiere on the Hob, and so it's very nice, and I like it very strong. I like it bitter and black, just like my heart. But I don't drink it after 3 in the afternoon, otherwise I don't sleep.
You don't get your nap, otherwise.
I don't get my kip in.
That's very sensible. Fine. Coffee it is then. This once. So, tell me what's exciting you about your work lately.
What's exciting me about my work? Oh, so I'm doing another book with David Gaffney, which is always very exciting because I love the way that David writes. This book we've written together, so we started with a premise each, basically. So the first book we did together was called The Three Rooms in Valerie's Head, which was out about this time last year. And it was... sorry, I've just drawn Preston looking very, very sad. He looks just desolate. He's ever so sad. What have we done to him?
Dare I say it, he has a slight look of emo Phillips about him.
Oh, good. I think he's got the eyes, isn't he? What was I saying? Oh yeah, so we the first book we did, we adapted. I think it was originally like 20-something of David's stories. He writes microfiction and novels and things like that. So he'd done 2 books of stories that were exactly 150 words in length. And so we took a bunch of those stories and then we sort of whisked it into a single narrative, and that worked for us. We liked having this sort of jigsaw puzzle that we could then try and piece together and then work out, and then how do we get this connective tissue that brings these things together. And it was a really good creative process, and it was a lot of fun. So when we came to write the new one, we thought, well, we'll let the same thing happen. So David had a story in mind about someone who worked for a social media network who was trying to get revenge on people who had wronged him in the past, and I had a story about a guy who wanted to build a boat, who ultimately ended up drowning. And so it's a cheery little tome it's going to be, but it's very funny. So we've been working on it for quite a while now, getting the full structure of the story into place, and we're very happy with how it's turning out. So that's been a joy. I spent, was it last week, the week before last, in the Netherlands with my students, or some of my students, and they were drawing comics on a 100-year-old boat, which was very cool. So I started drawing a comic all about them drawing a comic and being in the Dutch town of Leiden, which was a lot of fun. Just having the chance to sort of tool around in the sunshine, riding a little Dutch bike around a little Dutch town, and drawing comics all day, every day. It was good.
And so I saw from the social media posts you wore a quite spiffing hat.
I have the hat. Yes, I'm now wearing it. It's a captain's hat.
And do you wear that in class from now on? Is that a thing?
I think it's just going to be the general affectation that I have now. It's going to be, there goes Captain Dan, and I'll get a bigger beard and I'll shout, that's admirable Admiral Dan.
There we go, the admirable Admiral Dan.
I think you've got to say admirable Dan. Mr. Berry to you.
During the course of my not at all creepy stalkerish activities, I noticed you've been doing a lot of life drawing lately. Have you always made that part of your practice, to kind of keep your chops up?
I never did life drawing until about maybe 5 years ago, or thereabouts. So, in the town where I live, in the town of Shrewsbury, in Shropshire, in the Midlands, in England, in the UK, in Europe.
The planet Earth, the Milky Way.
The Milky Way. We've got quite a few comic artists. So, notably, we've got Charlie Adlard, who draws The Walking Dead. We've got Christian Ward. We've got Robbie Morrison, who, written for Charlie, he's written for 2000 AD and all sorts. We've got John Wagner, who lives down the road as well. So there's quite a neat little community of comic artists. And, I'd been hanging out with Charlie for a while, and he said, sort of sheepishly one day, do you want to come to life drawing? Like, I will if you will, sort of thing. And so we've been going to life drawing for quite a few years now, every Tuesday. It's good. I remember, again, when I was a teenager and I had the opportunity to go to life drawing, I didn't go because I already knew everything. That was the benefit of being a teenager. So, kind of, what an idiot, really. I passed out on a really good opportunity. And I really think that the life drawings are an excellent way to hone your observational ability, but also to, it's not a structured class where they say, right, now you must sort of measure with your thumb and, prance around in your smock or whatever. It's sort of just sit around and like, right, you got 20 minutes, do what you like. And so it's nice to be able to set yourself mad little challenges. In terms of sort of developing confidence, because I think you can always have more confidence and more understanding of what you do, I'll sort of self-sabotage like in the first line. So like, okay, the arm is coming down like that, and so I'll draw it as a big curve instead, and then I'll draw the foot really too big at the bottom, and then like, okay, fix that then if you're so smart. You're like, okay, I'll try, and so it's setting like mad little Sudokus for yourself to try and fill out, which I really enjoy. If I get new tools or new pens, or if I'm trying something out on the iPad, it's a great place to sort of prototype things really, really quickly, but also be able to see immediately, like, have you got it right? You've got something to test it against.
I mean, speaking of tools, you also make your own tools, as well, make your own ink pens, and you're not afraid to self-mutilate in the process of doing that, though.
Yeah, I think that's going to be on my tombstone. The guy poisoned himself, and so I've been making a unique drawing tool. I call it a blade pen for I think 4 years now. I think maybe 5, maybe longer. I think it's on version 30 something at this point. So it started as a piece of wood with some sort of scrap metal sort of stuck to the end that I shaped with a pair of pliers. And now it's got 3D printed components. It's my workshop here behind me. There's sort of 3D printers and pillar drills and sanding belts, giant vices. What else have I got? Rotary grinders and all sorts. So it's quite a sort of involved process now, with all sorts of parts. So yes, it's been a lot of fun to try and figure it out, but it's also been really, really dangerous. So I've given myself metal poisoning more than once, because the nibs are made from brass, and you can, if you inhale it, I mean it's copper and zinc there, and zinc is toxic. You shouldn't
make yourself quite sick. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. My temperature sort of dropped to like 32 or something like that, and I was like, saying to my wife, Kathy, I feel awful, and she's like, you feel really clammy, and I'm like, I don't feel right, Kathy. So I sort of sent myself to bed and like Googled, what is brass? Is brass okay to breathe? Like, absolutely not. No, you don't breathe that in. Also, try not to get too much of it on your skin, because it's poison in its powdered forms. So yeah, I've poisoned myself maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 times.
That's a reasonable amount.
It's a reasonable amount. I mean, for 4 or 5 years, it's like once a year, really.
Was the designing your own pen, was that a sort of almost like a natural, logical conclusion to your craft? As in, okay, I've done what I can with available tools, I need to make my own?
Yes, I think so. I think maybe I'm hesitating because you used the word conclusion, and I don't feel like it's ever going to finish. But I've been a sort of a penthusiast for a long time. From that sort of very early, like, how do you get that Chris Ware line? How do you get that Jack Kirby line? Because I was looking for that magic pencil, the thing that could draw staircases and, horses and motorbikes and all those things. So I've spent an ungodly amount of money on pens over the last sort of, God knows how many years, trying to find something that acted like I wanted it to. So there's a number of pens that I really, really like. There's a sort of vintage fountain pen from the sort of 1940s. There's the Swan Maybe Todds, the Watermans, and Conway Stewart's particularly have really, really nice. The Stilamine 303s are very nice as well. Really, really nice flexible nibs with a huge chunk of iridium on the end, so you can get this beautiful flexible line. But they're kind of awkward to maintain, and you've got to get used to them as well. And I feel like I'm really used to them. And I was very interested in how I got this organic line that had a lot of variability and flexibility without the accidental, oh crap, I've just broken a £100 pen, like by pressing too hard, which is, hurts. It really hurts. So the pen kind of grew out of that, trying to figure out what can I do with the tools. I've always been kind of a hands-on, make it kind of guy. So, the building I'm in at the moment I built with my bare hands. Very proud of that.
Yeah, on a scale of commitment, building your own studio from the ground up is kind of high.
Yeah, it was good. I mean, the sort of month 2, the roof blew off, and I had to sort of get a new one. That was a very it was a freak storm. It was horrible.
That's it, Dan. Blame the storm.
It was the storm. My tools are perfect. So it's not all sunflower and lollipops, but it's really nice. So this idea of can I make it? Can I do this thing myself? I think it's the sort of willful ignorance that I have when I'm drawing as well. Like, I don't care if it's going to be wrong. I'm going to finish it anyway. That sort of willful ignorance, and sort of you can sort of misread it as confidence, but I think of it as willful ignorance of the consequences. And
it's stubbornness. That's what I learned. It's complete, bull-headed stubbornness.
Yeah, that's basically what we're talking about now. So that's basically what I do is if I get into a new project, if I decide that I can't do it, then obviously I'm not going to be able to do it. But if I think, no, I'm going to dig foundations and I'm going to, make a log cabin, by God, I'm going to do that. So I can be quite bull-headed and stubborn about those things.
Right, back to this nasty business then. One of the things I like to talk about is struggle. It's just fun to watch others suffer. Let's introduce some struggle into Preston Gubbals' life. Now, he's cowered and spent some time now behind a bar in a hitherto unnamed low-budget hotel attached to a company.
Probably in London's Docklands, I should imagine.
So he's at the formerly Excel.
That's the one.
He's at London Book Fair.
There he is.
He's spent some years now cowering behind the bar with his minstrel's packet as a Jacobean rough of sorts, looking relatively miserable.
I think that's a very generous way of saying he looks terrible. He does. He looks really awful.
What is it about Preston's life that he wants? What's his goal? What's he really striving towards?
What does he want? He wants. Let's go back to that hierarchy of needs. I mean, he's got most things. He's got most things sewn up, but he doesn't have any sort of spiritual fulfillment. If I look at him in his first incarnation, wearing his carnation, his pinstripe suit and his orange tie and everything, I think he looks mean. He looks ready to take on the world, and he looks like he doesn't take no guff from no one. I look at him here, sort of weeping out of a pie, and I think that he can almost see the error of his ways. That love will now pass him by because he's dallied. He thought he had forever, and he didn't. And now here he is, slithering away, with his arms and legs sticking out of a pie. He's got a minstrel's bag wrapped around his throat, and he's got, like, hip and shoulder scars. Like, who could love him now?
Poor Preston.
I thought I've turned the tables on you.
I was going to create some misery in his life, but you were too keen. We'll change things up a little bit because, in a not even slightly suspicious turn of events, Algernon would perhaps like Preston to know that he is loved. He drifts into the cheap hotel bar that mirrors Preston's soul and beckons to him, saying, "I thought I hated the very guts of you, fella, but I'm starting to feel something much deeper for you. Something real. Something close to my heart."
This sounds like a trap. To be honest with you.
How could it possibly be a trap, Dan?
I think he's going to love the taste of him or something like that.
Alas, we must let Suitcase determine how trusting of this change of heart Preston Gubbals will be. Suitcase, if you will. Jeez, can you not number generate a little bit more gently? That'll need stitches. It's an 8. So, Dan, How enthusiastically does this mean Preston reacts to Algernon's advances?
That's good for one of our characters, isn't it? Well, I think, he feels like he's been locked in a dark room, and it's not necessarily that the lights have been turned on and the wallpaper is love hearts. I think that would be the 10. And he's just surrounded by infinite love forever. An 8 is the door opens and kissy noises come from the light outside, and so he just sort of I was going to say bounds out the door, but I guess he sort of slithers with real purpose towards these sort of smoochy noises. The smell of the pie in old cartoons that would seductively make non-obscene hand gestures at the main character, like that. Basically, I think that's that sort of level of besottedness.
As Preston Gubbals slithers with hope toward Algernon, braced to receive the love he craves, Algernon cackles and whips a jug of hot liquor from behind his back and hurls the contents at poor Gubbals. Again, suitcase provided you with an 8, Dan. What kind of damage have we caused?
I think it went into his eyes, because they're kind of leading the charge there if he's slithering towards his true love.
He doesn't need them.
He's a aquatic creature. It's murky down there. Well, where he's going, it's very dark. So I think maybe he's blinded. Maybe he has facial scalding.
Indeed.
I think the rest of his body might have been protected by the minstrel's bag. What turned out to be perhaps an impediment has turned out to be his saving grace.
Who'd have thought minstrels would save the day?
Who'd have thought?
You mentioned earlier that you teach other young blackguards in the art of illustration. How has your time teaching actually affected the work you produce?
I think what it has done is... maybe this is going to sound mean, but it's a really, really good way of being able to see in the flaws of others what you don't see in your own work. So when someone gets something wrong and it's absolutely blindingly obvious to you, as a really good example, I had a student a few years ago now who drew a comic about, I think it was his brother, who would throw a ball, and in every panel the ball would be in air. And I was reading it and thinking, so there's a magician who's levitating this ball around, and this guy's like, no, he's throwing the ball up and down. I'm like, but you never see the up, or you only ever see the up, you don't see the down, you don't see any of that thing. So in every panel. And so that was an example of that sort of, oh, right, moment where you realise that you're not doing comics for yourself, you're doing them for someone else, and that they've got to be legible and readable and understandable. You can't rely on people understanding what it is that you know about the story. You've got to feed them all of the context, otherwise they'll take their own to it. And so if the only context you have of someone with a ball sort of hovering above a hand is like the idea of levitation, like that, you're going to feed that context into it and completely misunderstand the story. And so I have this very sort of purpose-driven approach to comics. Like, what's the purpose of this panel? What's the purpose of this particular page? What's the purpose of this dialogue? What's the purpose of the gesture, or the the roll of the eyes, or the hunch of the shoulders? And this goes back to what I was saying about it being a form of sort of mind control, in that each of those things is going to have an effect on the way that someone understands the context of the story. And you have to feed them all of the context that they need to know, otherwise they bring their own to it. And that's when you start to get into this odd ambiguity, in that people can experience your version of mind control in different ways, in which case it's not mind control. You've to my mind, it's not succeeded in its primary purpose, which was to tell a story in the way that I wanted it to be told. So, working with students has been really, really good in helping me figure that out for myself. Because it's really difficult sometimes to see your own particular flaws, but then, when you see them reflected back at you, and you go home after a long day, and you go back to drawing a character who's throwing this ball in the air, and you're like, oh no, he's got to come down again.
I can't be a hypocrite.
Exactly.
We've talked about Preston Gubbals' struggle. One of my favourite pieces of your own work is Carry Me, which is a really great example of the challenge of drawing comics without dialogue. How do you go about setting new challenges for yourself to keep things interesting?
Well, I think with Carry Me, the challenge with that one, I mean, it came from kind of a couple of experiences. My daughter had just been born, and she's fine, by the way. She's fine.
She's fine. She's all right.
She's fine, everyone. She's okay. Not been chased off by a big dog or anything.
No, not really, really old.
No, no. But we were walking across some fields from her grandparents' house to our house. So it was maybe a mile walk. It was a lovely warm day, and so she was I don't know 1, maybe 1.5, if, and so I was having to carry her. And I remember hearing this dog somewhere off in the background, and I was like, "Oh, I hope this dog doesn't come and attack us." Like that, like I said, that inner monologue, that dumb voice that you have, and then that sort of spiraled into like, "Oh, wouldn't it be awful, if we did get attacked?" Like, and then you're like, "Well, time's attacking us all, really, isn't it?" And, when you have kids, you have this sort of quite profound period of morbidity, I think, where you consider your own death and your own place in the world and all the rest of it. So it was, I'd say it's weighing heavily on my mind, but it's something that was certainly at the forefront. And so when I started drawing that comic, it was one of the first comics I'd drawn where I just drew it and didn't plan it. There was no roughs underneath.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah.
Because my feeling on it was that you don't get any practice. If this is a story about life and death, you don't get practices. So, going in straight in with ink, and painting it, and that's what it will be. So if it's correct, it's correct, and if it's wrong, it's wrong, and I accept that. And that was difficult to let it go. There's only one bit that I had to redraw because my son got a page and he coloured it in, and he's a year older than than his sister, and so very very kindly and politely told him not to draw on Daddy's special comics. So he that was about it really. So that was a challenge, and I've done a number of 24-hour comics. I've done quite a few 24-hour comics now, and they've been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed drawing 24-hour comics. I remember the first one was very, very difficult, and my hand swelled up, and I felt, awful for a long time afterwards. And then the second one wasn't as bad, and then the third one was okay. And you sort of make it stressful for yourself in mad new ways, I suppose. So 24-hour comics haven't really been difficult. They're time-consuming and they are challenging, but it's not a challenge that's impossible. So now I've done a bunch, it's kind of easy. I like 24-hour hourly comics day because you don't get excused from real life. So you still got to do comics and have a life. My rule for hourly comics day is you're not allowed to draw comics about drawing comics.
It becomes pretty meta after a while.
It really starts to gaze up its own bum after a certain point, and so that's my rule for hourly comics. And I think in terms of the challenge, it's trying to push myself out of my comfort zone. So whether it's with one of the 24-hour comics was a ghost story called Nicholas and Edith that had sort of time travel element to it, and again it was one of those stories where we're all doomed. There's obviously there's wordless comics. There's I did a book called Bear Canyon where I went in with the very, very loosest idea of the story, and that again was a 24-hour comic, and I'm like, okay, so I have the very barest, loosest inkling of what this story might be about, and I'm going to just start page 1, and hopefully by the time I get to the end it's made sense, and it's readable. I wouldn't say it's the best thing I've ever done, but it's certainly a challenge, and it was a lot of fun to draw.
Okay, it's that time. There's no avoiding it. The unfortunate Preston Gubbals has to meet his horrific demise.
He's looking very, very forlorn at the moment.
I think from the looks of him, he's almost there.
I think he might be. He's not necessarily at death's door, but he's in death's neighbourhood for sure. Down death's cul-de-sac.
Death adjacent. He's ringing on the doorbell. Perhaps death is coming along.
He's lost his suit. He's lost his arms and his legs. He's lost his vision and his ability to be stealthy. So, I mean, suitcase, fire away. I mean, what other mockery can we inflict on this poor thing that God hates so much, apparently?
Suitcase, one last time, please. How many times don't number generate directly into my eye? Is that... Yeah, it's a 7.
Okay, so things are looking up from where they were.
It's not going to be the most painful death. Algernon rings on Preston's doorbell, living as he does adjacent to death, and Preston doesn't answer because, let's face it, how the hell is he going to do that?
He might be able to sort of like hoist himself up and sort of mutter through the letterbox. Maybe.
No, that's a fantastic. I think you're making it worse for him. But what is Preston going to mutter through the letterbox, Dan?
Oh, I thought you loved me. I thought you loved me. He's just going to keep repeating it, just quieter and quieter, just through big snotty tears.
This is getting quite dark, and I like it.
Okay.
Algernon whispers, not nicely, kind of creepily, through the crack in the door, that this is an act of love. The ultimate act of love is releasing you from your torment.
I think that actually makes a bit too much sense to Preston. I think that this sort of act of devotion is touching for him. I think he feels a sense of grace and fulfillment. Does that equate to a 7? Is I guess what I'm asking.
No, I'll tell you what equates to a 7 is the fact that Algernon has fitted up Preston's house secretly with various fires for baking into a pie.
Okay.
So every hole in Preston's house, well, let's say 7 out of 10 holes in Preston's house.
So that's the fireplace. Under the stairs.
Chimney.
Some
of the plug holes.
The extractor fan.
The extractor fan.
The oven hood.
Always thinking practically. We're not even looking at the oven. Like everything attached to an oven is an oven.
He turned all 4 burners on.
And hell, let's say the refrigerator. All of these things are secretly ovens, burners, and Algernon cranks the dial up to 7. Not a 10, a 7. It's going to be slow, but it's not going to be too slow.
So it's going to take 40 minutes today.
It's going to 40 minutes on high.
Okay.
And while he turns on the burners, he's feeding liquor through the letterbox.
As he would.
And poor Preston is gurgling. What would you say, Dan, is Preston's final words, his final reaction as he's slowly baked into a giant house-sized pie?
I never deserved anything more than this. I think he's kind of down on himself, I think.
Yeah, as you would be, really, at that stage, being baked into a pie. And what kind of aroma do you think would float up from that particular house?
Oh, gravy.
Gravy.
Onions. Just delicious seafood.
As the heat builds inside, Algernon is heaping shovels full of mashed potato outside the house. This, coupled with the unmistakable aroma of pastry, liquor, and delicious eel seeping from the windows, is drawing the neighbours from all around. They have forks at the ready, and surely, as Preston Gubbals bakes to his doom, writhing in agony, he can take some comfort in the knowledge that he will soon be part of the most delicious street feast to grace these lands for quite some time. Probably not. Who cares?
He was a horrendous eyesore.
Dan, you've been a more enthusiastic misery maker than your mask of being a pleasant human being could have suggested. Bravo! You've more than earned the opportunity to shell your wares. Tell us, how can we throw support and hard cash at you?
Oh, okay. I would like for people to buy my books. Sorry, I was thinking about the colour of teeth then. Yeah, buy my books. I have a book with David Gaffney called 3 Rooms in Valerie's Head. I'm very proud of that book. I think it's dead good. I think you'll like it. It's funny and dark and silly and creepy and moving. And I think it's right up everyone's street. So that's a big thing I want you to do. I have other books. I have a book that I edited called 24/7, which was a 24-hour comic. It was nominated for an Eisner Award a couple of years ago, which was very nice. We didn't win, so that's an Eisner Award.
Nice
what we lost. It's nice just to be nominated. I'll be honest, it would have been nicer to win. So, there's that. I have a web shop, I think, where occasionally you can buy my pens. They're not on sale at the moment, because whenever I put them on sale, that is weeks and weeks and weeks of me being poisoned and bludgeoned and sliced and diced, and then fulfilling orders with, a concussion.
And people want a taste of that danger.
And they really want to taste that danger. So keep an eye out on my Instagram, which is @thingsbydan, and my Twitter @thingsbydan, because I will let you know if I'm going to make some more pens. I'm likely to have another book out before long, which I hope to have ready for the show in Dublin in April, where I'm going to be a guest there. That's right, April the 6th, in the Bovril factory, the custard factory, the jelly bean factory.
The chocolate factory, I think. No.
Chocolate factory.
It might be the chocolate factory.
It's something factory.
It's a factory of some description.
I know that the custard factory is in Birmingham, and that's maybe where I'm getting a little muddled up. I mean, we've got dessert covered. Look out for me there. If you ask very nicely and give me some money, I might draw you as if you were a bird. My son will be coming along as well, and I'm sure he would love to draw your cat. He's 7 years old.
Cats are more difficult than birds, Dan. I think perhaps
he's a much better artist than I am. Yeah, he'll charge more, and I will take a very modest cut to cover his plane fare.
Congratulations, Dan Berry. You are now a permanent member of the Society for Ungentlemanly Conduct, whether you like it or not.
Thank you very much.
Now, get out. Assuming Dan Berry survives the pack of rabid squirrels that I may or may not have bred to enjoy the specific taste of his flesh, you should go and check out his website, www.thingsbydan.co.uk, and his podcast, Make It, Then Tell Everybody. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Character Assassination, produced by me, Nerius, and brought to you by Studio Squidink. You can find us on Instagram @Studio Squidink and at our website www.studiosquidink.com. Come visit us again for art, tea, and a jolly spot of murder on another barely competent episode of Character Assassination.